What is colonization? Colonization necessarily means fragmentation, breakage. The purpose of colonization is to exert control over and forcibly extract wealth from the colonized people. However, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to colonize a people if they were completely whole. What I mean by whole is a community that is connected to the things which they need to survive and stay strong and healthy in every way. That means not just food, shelter, and water, but also family, culture, language, customs, spirituality, systems of knowledge, and so on. The things that give you a sense of wholeness. A people that understand themselves well, have all their necessities, and have strong relationship with the world around them are not easy to manipulate. But if you start fragmenting this wholeness, breaking it down into smaller pieces, then you can start the process of colonization and ultimately control and exploit a people. And you can see this breaking within different elements and stages of colonization. For example, in the initial military invasion, there is literally a physical breakage of bodies, of homes, of landscapes, shock and awe. This is the initial exhibit of the colonizer's violent disposition. Show that you mean business. Flex your military power and your willingness to use it. And use that as a threat of further violence if there's any resistance. After the initial physical breakage comes the economic breakage, where the colonizer separates us from our means of subsistence, or the means of basic survival. They place the physical resources and necessities of the community under the control of the colonizers. This is done as a form of leverage that forces the colonized into a system where we depend on the colonizers for basic survival. Before, you could just go to the river and get water, but now the river is under colonial control, and you must pay them for the water. We have been separated, fragmented, broken off from our means of subsistence. Finally, and perhaps most effective long-term, are the different forms of cultural breakage. Having standing armies to control and patrol people can be pretty costly. It's a lot more effective if the colonized patrol themselves in ways that benefit the colonizer. That means that there is a cultural penetration of the colonized. Their cultures are fragmented and replaced by the colonizer's culture. So in all of these stages, colonization depends on fragmentation, on separation, on breaking the integrity of the colonized. In fact, the word integrity originates from integer, the Latin word for whole. From there, of course, we also derive the word integer, a whole number, and the Spanish word entero, the word for whole. So when we say that colonization broke our integrity, it is quite literally and figuratively a breaking of the wholeness of our beings. We are not complete anymore. We have been separated from the different realms of a healthy and meaningful life. Where we once had an integrated existence, colonization disintegrated that wholeness. There is no shortage of examples of the disintegrating, fragmenting, alienating, breaking power of colonization. It has separated us from our original languages, our land, our spiritualities, customs, families, food sources, cultures, identities, histories, knowledge bases. In short, it has alienated us from all our relations. And I mean that to the fullest extent of that phrase. All our relationships have suffered. If colonization is the disintegration of our world, then decolonization is the reintegration of our world. It is the act of picking up the fragments and piecing ourselves and our communities back together again. It is remembering the dismembered. In what different ways do you see the fragmenting and damaging consequences of colonization?
Colonization is not enlightenment, health, freedom, salvation, or civilization. Colonization is theft, profit, greed, and suppression. Historically, colonies have existed for the sole purpose of enriching, in one form or another, the colonizer. The consequence is to maintain the economic dependency of the colonized. Colonization is Europe's historical spasm, a form of civilization which, at a certain point in its history, finds itself obligated, for internal reasons, to extend to a world scale the competition of its antagonistic economies. Europe began to propagate at a time when it had fallen into the hands of the most unscrupulous financiers and captains of industry. It was our misfortune to encounter that particular Europe on our path, and that Europe is responsible before the human community for the highest heap of corpses in history. Colonization is dehumanization.
Colonization dehumanizes both the colonized and the colonizer. The colonizer sees the colonized as animals and treats them like animals, but also acts like and thus become animal.
Colonization is systemic relations of domination. Between the colonizer and colonized, there is room only for forced labor, intimidation, pressure, the police, taxation, theft, rape, compulsory crops, contempt, mistrust, arrogance, self-complacency, swinishness, brainless elites, degraded masses. No human contact, but relations of domination and submission which turns the colonizing man into a classroom monitor, an army sergeant, a prison guard, a slave driver, and the indigenous man into an instrument of production. Colonization is thingification. My turn to state an equation. Colonization equals thingification. Colonization is alienation.
I am talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibility wiped out.
Millions of men torn from their gods, their land, their habits, their life, from the dance, from wisdom. Millions of men in whom fear has been cunningly instilled, who have been taught to have an inferiority complex, to tremble, kneel, despair, and behave like flunkies. Natural economies disrupted, harmonious and viable economies adapted to the indigenous population, food crops destroyed, malnutrition permanently introduced, agricultural development oriented solely toward the benefit of the metropolitan countries, the looting of products, the looting of raw materials. How deep the seeds of alienation have been sown among the colonized. I'm talking of Christianity, and this should come as no surprise to anybody. The church does not call the colonized to the ways of God, but to the ways of the white man, to the ways of the master, the ways of the oppressor. Colonization is force. Colonized mostly are met with the police. In colonial regions,
the proximity and frequent direct intervention by the police and military ensure the colonized are kept under close scrutiny.
Colonialism is naked violence and only gives in when confronted with greater violence. Racism. The colonist is not content with physically limiting the space of the colonized, that is, with the help of his agents of law and order. As if to illustrate the totalitarian nature of colonial exploitation, the colonist turns the colonized into a kind of quintessence of evil. The imposition of fear. The colonized subject is penned in. The first thing the colonial subject learns is to remain in his place and not overstep its limits. Fascism. This aggression of colonizers towards colonized can boomerang back on the colonizing society itself in the form of fascism. At the level of the individual and human rights, what is fascism but colonialism at the very heart of traditionally colonialist countries? Divisive, indirect rule. By its very structure, colonialism is separatist and regionalist. Colonialism is not merely content to note the existence of tribes, it reinforces and differentiates them. The colonial system nurtures the chieftainships. The elimination of the chiefs is a prerequisite to the unification of the people. External determination. Colonial subjects have their political decisions made for them by the colonial masters, and those decisions are handed down directly or through a process of indirect rule.
The white power structure rules the black community through local blacks who are responsive to the white leaders. The downtown white machine, not the black populace.
What is not colonization? Every day that passes, every denial of justice, every beating by the police, every demand of the workers that is drowned in blood, every scandal that is hushed up, every punitive expedition, every gendarme and every militiaman brings home to us the value of our old societies. They were communal societies, never societies of the many for the few. They were societies that were not only anti-capitalist, but also anti-capitalist. They were democratic societies, always. They were cooperative societies, fraternal societies.